Imagine walking into your own bedroom, only to find the love of your life betraying you with another. For most, heartbreak would lead to tears, maybe even a bitter divorce. But for Elijah Turner, it triggered something far darker. A plan so cold, so calculated, it would leave detectives stunned. 42 shots fired, 2 lovers dead. But was it truly a crime of passion or a murder months in the making? Stay with us as we uncover the chilling truth behind one of the most disturbing cases you've never heard of. And hey, if you love deep dive true crime stories that reveal the shocking secrets behind the headlines, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more, and drop a comment below, because after you hear what Elijah did, I guarantee you're going to have something to say. Blood splattered the cream-colored walls of the bedroom, turning the once cozy space into a gruesome scene of carnage. Zara Turner's body lay on crumpled silk sheets that could no longer be called white. Her dark skin was riddled with bullet holes, and her eyes, once full of life, now stared blankly at the ceiling. Next to her, half hanging from the bed, was the body of a young man, Jamal Reed. His athletic physique was not spared from the barrage of bullets that turned his torso into a bloody mess. Patrol Officer Martinez was the first to enter the bedroom and froze on the threshold. He'd seen a lot in his 7 years on the force, but this much blood made even him turn away and take a deep breath. "Good heavens," he muttered, stepping out into the hallway where his partner was talking on the radio. "Call the detectives. This is the worst thing I've seen in my entire career." Detective Marcus Johnson arrived on the scene 23 minutes after the call. His tattered sedan was parked behind 2 police cars with flashing lights illuminating the front of a 2-story house in Cleveland's upscale neighborhood. The overcast November sky was dropping a light rain, turning the ground into a muddy mess. The detective pulled up the hood of his jacket and walked briskly toward the house. He was joined in the driveway by his partner, Officer Tisha Brooks, a young woman with a tenacious gaze and a notepad in her hand. "What do we got?" Johnson asked as he climbed the porch steps. "Double homicide," Brooks replied. "A man and a woman in a bedroom on the 2nd floor. Driver's license says the woman is the homeowner Zara Turner. The other is Jamal Reed, 21 years old, presumably lovers." Johnson nodded, putting on latex gloves. "Suspect woman's husband, Elijah Turner, 34 years old, located in the living room, according to patrol officers, in a state of shock, weapon in hand." They entered the house, where they were greeted by the smell of gunpowder and copper, the smell of fresh blood. Johnson surveyed the hallway with a professional eye. Expensive furniture, stylishly framed pictures, no sign of a struggle. "Who called the police?" he asked, moving on. "A neighbor. Evelyn Jefferson," Brooks said, checking her notes. "She heard multiple gunshots and a man screaming." They went up to the 2nd floor. Even without seeing the crime scene, Johnson could smell the distinctive odor of death. Forensics was already working in the bedroom, and a patrol officer stood in the doorway blocking the way for the curious. "Detective Johnson." Marcus introduced himself, showing his badge. "What happened here?" "A massacre, sir," the patrolman replied, stepping aside. "Just a massacre." Entering the bedroom, Johnson stood still for a moment. The walls, ceiling, furniture, everything was splattered with blood. The bodies on the bed were barely identifiable as human because of the number of bullet wounds. "Jesus." Brooks exhaled behind his back. Johnson slowly approached the bed, trying not to step on the shell casings scattered all over the floor. One of the forensics guys looked up from his work. 42 casings, detective. "We're still counting, but it looks like not a single round went to waste. Both bodies had multiple wounds." Johnson squatted down to examine the nearest shell casing, caliber 9mm, presumably from a Glock semi-automatic pistol. Shooter emptied the magazine, reloaded, and kept firing. Then did it again. The detective scrutinized the arrangement of the bodies. They lay close together, caught off guard. No sign of any attempt to defend themselves or escape. The first shots had probably been fatal, the others, the result of rage. "Time of death?" he asked the medical examiner who was examining the bodies preliminarily. "Between 200 and 300 p.m. The temperature of the bodies and rigor mortis indicate that." The expert replied without taking a break from his work. "Death was instantaneous." The first bullets hit vital organs. Johnson looked around the bedroom. On the bedside table was a framed photograph of Elijah and Zara smiling against the backdrop of Niagara Falls. The happy couple. Something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Brooks, check the rest of the second floor," he ordered. "I'll go down to the suspect." In the first-floor living room, Elijah Turner sat on the couch staring into the void. His dark hands, stained with blood, rested listlessly in his lap. A patrol officer stood nearby holding a gun in an evidence bag. "Detective Johnson, homicide." Marcus introduced himself, taking a seat across from Elijah. "Mr. Turner, do you understand what happened?" Elijah slowly shifted his gaze to the detective. His eyes were red and swollen with tears, but they were empty now. "I killed them," he said in a lifeless voice. "I killed my wife and that boy." Johnson nodded, turning on the recorder. "Tell me what happened." Elijah swallowed, his eyes wandering again. "I got home early. The presentation for the client was canceled. I wanted to surprise Zara, maybe take her out to lunch." He stopped talking, then continued in a changed voice. "I heard sounds coming from the bedroom. Went upstairs. They were there together. My Zara and that boy." His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white with tension. "I don't remember anything after that. Just the sound, gunshots, lots of shots, and blood. Blood everywhere." "Where did you get the gun, Mr. Turner?" Johnson asked, making notes in his notebook. "I bought it 2 years ago for self-defense. I have a permit," Elijah replied. "It was kept in a safe in my office. I don't remember getting it. I just remember shooting and shooting until I ran out of bullets, and then reloading and shooting again." Johnson watched the man closely. The story seemed genuine. A classic case of a crime of passion. Husband catches his wife with a lover and loses control. But 42 shots. It was more than just instant rage. "Did you know this young man, Jamal Reed?" Elijah shook his head. "Only that he worked with Zara at the gallery. A student," she said. "She was helping him with his thesis." His voice trembled. "I never thought. We'd been married for 7 years. At that moment, Tisha Brooks entered the living room. "Detective, we need to talk to the neighbors. They're gathered outside." Johnson nodded and turned to the patrolman. "Deputize him and bring him to the station. I'll continue the questioning there." When they got outside, they saw a group of people crowded behind the police tape. Many of them were taking pictures on their cell phones. "Typical reaction," Johnson muttered. "Tragedy as entertainment." They approached a middle-aged woman who appeared to be the same Evelyn Jefferson who had called the police. "I was at home making dinner," she said, fidgeting with her scarf. "Suddenly I heard gunshots. Lots of shots, one after another, then a pause, and then shots again. It was horrible. I called 911 immediately." "Were you friends with the Turner family?" Johnson asked. "We were good neighbors. Sometimes we had barbecues on weekends. They seemed like the perfect couple." The woman shook her head. "Zara is so bright, always smiling. Elijah is more reserved but very polite. I never would have guessed." "Have you noticed any problems in their relationship lately?" Brooks intervened. "Any fights, tension?" Evelyn hesitated. "Well, they hadn't been together much the last couple of months. Elijah had been working a lot. Zara often came home late, but I never heard them fighting." Another neighbor, an elderly man with a cane, interjected into the conversation. 3 weeks ago I saw them arguing in the driveway. It was pretty heated. It was unusual for them." "What was the argument about?" Johnson asked. "I can't say for sure, but I heard Elijah say something like, 'You're never home. We don't even talk anymore.' Zara replied that she needed space and that his constant control was suffocating her." Johnson made a note in his notebook. "A classic situation, a relationship falls apart and one partner seeks solace on the side. And this young man, Jamal Reed, have you seen him here before?" Evelyn nodded. "A few times. I thought he was a co-worker of Zara's. They worked together on some catalogs for the gallery. Zara said he was very talented." Johnson and Brooks interviewed a few other neighbors, but no one added significant information. The big picture was emerging quite clearly: an outwardly prosperous marriage, hidden problems, a young attractive co-worker, and a husband who had caught them together. Back at the house, the detectives met the head of the forensics team, who was wrapping up his work. "Detective Johnson, We've collected all the evidence. I've never seen this many shell casings at a domestic murder scene. The suspect must have reloaded his weapon at least twice. That suggests extreme rage, Johnson noted. Or something else. When they returned to the station, Elijah Turner was already in the interrogation room. He looked devastated but more collected than he had at the crime scene. Johnson sat down across from him, spreading out a folder of preliminary reports. "Mr. Turner, I want you to detail the events of today from the very beginning." Elijah folded his hands on the table. "I woke up at 600 in the morning as usual. Zara was still asleep. I showered, had breakfast, and left for the office by 8. I had a presentation scheduled for 2:00 in the afternoon for an important client, but at 12:30 I got a call that the client was sick. The meeting was postponed until the following week." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I decided to go home and surprise Zara. We hadn't spent much time together lately. I thought maybe I could take her out to lunch or just spend some time together." "What time did you get home?" Johnson asked. "About 2:00, maybe a little earlier. I noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway, but I didn't think much of it. Zara often invited colleagues from the gallery." His voice trembled as he continued. "I went into the house, called out to Zara. She didn't answer. I went upstairs and heard sounds from the bedroom. Our bedroom." Elijah clenched his hands into fists so hard his knuckles turned white. "I opened the door and saw them, Zara and that guy. In our bed. They hadn't even heard me come in, so engrossed in each other." Johnson watched Elijah's face, noting how it contorted with pain and anger at the memory. "What happened next?" "I don't remember. Honestly, I don't remember. The next thing I realized was that I'm standing there with a gun and they're dead. There's blood everywhere. I remember reloading the gun once. Twice, I don't know, and I kept shooting. Do you remember going for the gun in the study?" Elijah frowned, trying to remember. "No, but the gun was kept there in the safe. The code was Zara's birthday." Johnson made a notation. It was an important detail. The gun wasn't kept in the bedroom. To get it, Elijah had to go downstairs, open the safe, get the gun, and return to the bedroom. It took time, and a certain amount of deliberation. "What can you tell me about your marriage lately?" Elijah lowered his eyes. "We've grown distant from each other. I've been working a lot. Zara became more independent since she started working at the gallery full time. We talked less, made love less, but I never thought that we'd get to this point." "Did you know about her relationship with Jamal Reed?" "No," Elijah exclaimed. "She said he was a talented student she was helping with a thesis project. He came over to our house a few times, but always for work. At least that's what I thought." Johnson leaned back in his chair, assessing the situation. Elijah's story sounded plausible, a classic case of a cheating spouse being caught and an emotional explosion. But still 42 shots, it required an explanation. "Mr. Turner, you reloaded your weapon at least twice. That means you made a conscious effort during the incident. Are you sure you don't remember anything after seeing them together?" Elijah shook his head, his gaze becoming absent-minded. "Just the flashes, the rumble of gunfire, the smell of gunpowder, the screams. I don't know who was screaming, me or them. Maybe all of us." Brooks, sitting next to Johnson, turned a page in her notebook. "Have you ever threatened your wife?" "Never," Elijah answered firmly. "I loved her. I still love her. Even now." The interrogation continued for another hour. Elijah answered every question without evasion or concealment. He confessed to the murder and confirmed that he had acted out of passion, not fully realizing his actions. After the interrogation, Johnson and Brooks gathered in the office to discuss the case. "Classic crime of passion," Brooks said, reviewing her notes. "Motive is clear. Open and shut case." Johnson tapped his pen on the desk thoughtfully. "Too perfect. 42 shots, Brooks. It's not just effect, it's obsession. Or extreme rage," she countered. "All the neighbors say the Turners seemed like the perfect couple. Imagine the shock when you discover it's an illusion." Johnson nodded. But something continued to bother him. "Tomorrow we'll get the ballistics results and the coroner's full report. Then we'll see." He organized the papers into a folder. "In the meantime, we're filing a double murder charge. His lawyer will probably argue passion as a mitigating factor. When Brooks left, Johnson was alone in his office. He went over the crime scene photos again. Something about the arrangement of the shell casings seemed wrong. They were scattered too evenly, as if the shooter had moved methodically around the room. It didn't fit the image of a man out of control. But maybe he was just looking for complications where there weren't any. Sometimes the most obvious explanation is the right one. Husband caught his wife with her lover and killed them in a fit of rage. Nothing unusual for a man whose world had just crumbled. Johnson closed the folder and turned off the light. Tomorrow would be another day, and perhaps new details would shed more light on the case. The morgue greeted Detective Marcus Johnson with a sterile chill and the pungent smell of disinfectants. Dr. Lorraine Foster, the county's chief medical examiner, was already waiting for him beside two gurneys covered with sheets. "Good morning, Marcus," she greeted, adjusting her glasses on the bridge of her nose. Though in this case it's hardly a good morning. Johnson nodded, pulling on his medical gloves. "What do we have, Lorraine?" Dr. Foster pulled back the sheet, exposing the bullet-riddled body of Zara Turner. 25 entry wounds on the front of the body alone, 9 more on the back. Cause of death is obvious, multiple gunshot wounds. But there are interesting details. She pointed to a cluster of holes in the chest area. The first bullets entered here, at least 5, from a distance of about 2 meters, judging by the powder residue. These shots were lethal, hitting the heart, lungs, major blood vessels. Death was almost instantaneous. And the others? Johnson asked, scrutinizing the body. "Here's what's strange," Foster said, turning Zara's body over. The rest of the shots came from different angles and distances. Some were almost point blank. She pointed to the charred edges of several wounds, others from 2 to 3 meters away. The trajectories are very different, indicating that the shooter was moving around the room. Johnson frowned. That contradicted Turner's testimony. He claimed he didn't remember shooting, that he was acting out of passion. And this, Dr. Foster continued, ignoring his comment, is the weirdest part. She showed Zara's back. "See these entry holes? The trajectory of the bullets entered from the bottom up, as if the victim was already face down when she was shot. Are you saying she was shot, then rolled over, and kept shooting? Or she fell on her stomach after the first shots, and the shooter continued shooting in the back?" Foster shrugged. Either way, it points to a more complex pattern than a simple momentary loss of control. They moved on to the second body, Jamal Reed. The pattern was similar, multiple wounds from various angles and distances. Most of the bullets entered the upper body. 8 in the head, Foster explained, indicating targeted shooting. But what's interesting is that the trajectories indicate that many of the shots were fired when the victim had already fallen on his side. Johnson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. So Turner shot his wife first, then Reed, and then continued to shoot both. Or vice versa, Foster said. Without a more detailed ballistics analysis, it's hard to determine the sequence. But one thing I am sure of, this was not the erratic shooting of a man in a state of passion. There are elements of methodical behavior. Back at the station, Johnson met with Tisha Brooks, who was examining crime scene photos spread out on a table. Dakar. Foster found oddities in the location of the bullet holes. He reported, arranging the new autopsy photos on the board. In her opinion, the shooting was more methodical than would be expected under effect. Brooks nodded, not looking away from the photos. "I found something interesting too. Look at the arrangement of the shell casings." She pointed to a diagram of the bedroom with the casing locations marked. They form a sort of semicircle around the bed. If Turner had just burst into the room and started shooting while standing in one place, the casings would have been more compactly arranged. Johnson scrutinized the pattern. Indeed, the casings were scattered as if the shooter had methodically circled the room, firing from different positions. "You continue here, and I'll look into Zara's past. We need to understand what's been going on in her life for the last few months." It took him 3 hours to gather information on Zara Turner. She'd worked at the Prism Gallery of Contemporary Art for the past 2 years, starting as a receptionist and working her way up to assistant curator. According to co-workers, she was talented, ambitious, and well-versed in contemporary art. Johnson reviewed her social media pages. Zara often posted photos from exhibitions, colleagues, occasionally with her husband. In recent months, in her tape appeared pictures with Jamal Reed. They worked together on some projects, attended art events. One of the posts caught his attention, a photo of Zara and Jamal in front of a sculpture, with the caption, "My talented protege. Soon the world will know your name." The date 3 months ago. Zara's phone, seized from the scene, was password protected, but tech was able to unlock it. Johnson was going through the messages when Brooks entered the office with a folder in her hands. "I've got something interesting," she said, placing the printouts of bank statements in front of him. "I checked the Turner's finances and found some strange transactions in Elijah's account." Johnson put the phone away and looked at the documents. "In the last 3 months, he's withdrawn a total of $35,000 in cash." Brooks continued, "Small amounts so as not to draw the bank's attention. He also opened a new account at another bank 2 weeks ago and transferred had $50,000 into it." Preparing to flee, Johnson suggested. "Or a divorce, maybe. But here's what else is strange." Brooks turned the page. A month ago, Elijah took out a life insurance policy on Zara. The payout amount was $500,000. Johnson whistled. "A solid motive for murder. And he's the beneficiary, of course?" Brooks nodded. "I checked his work computer that we took from the office. He was searching the internet for information about insurance policies, terms of payment, including violent deaths." Johnson drummed his fingers on the table thoughtfully. "But why kill Jamal too? If money was the goal, shooting his wife and staging a robbery would have been enough. Maybe Jamal was just a bonus." Brooks suggested. "Caught them together, got angry, and decided to kill them both. But did it in a more calculated way than he wants us to imagine." Johnson nodded. "Good work, Brooks. Let's talk to Zara's colleagues at the gallery now. Maybe they can shed some light on her relationship with Jamal." A Prism gallery was located in Cleveland's trendy neighborhood amidst boutiques and cafes. The austere glass and concrete facade contrasted with the colorful installations visible through the windows. Inside, they were greeted by the gallery's director, Amina Wilson, an elegant woman in her 50s with short silver hair. After learning the purpose of the visit, she led the detectives into her office. "It's a terrible tragedy," Amina said as they settled into their chairs. "Zara was a talented employee and a wonderful person, and Jamal so young with so much potential. How long has Zara worked at your gallery?" Johnson asked. 2 years. She quickly established herself as a specialist with excellent taste and an understanding of contemporary art. "I recently promoted her to assistant curator." "And Jamal Reed," Johnson continued. "He wasn't a permanent member of our staff. He was an art college student who worked part-time for us. Zara took him under her wing, thought he was a very promising artist." "Did they spend a lot of time together?" Brooks asked. Amina frowned slightly. "Yes. They had been paired up a lot the last few months. Zara was helping him with his graduation project, an installation we were planning to exhibit at the end of the year." "Did you notice a special relationship between them?" Johnson asked cautiously. The gallery director pressed her lips together. "I don't want to speak ill of the dead, detective, but yes, there was chemistry between them that went beyond a professional relationship. I even talked to Zara about it a couple of months ago, reminded her that she was married and Jamal was much younger." "How did she react?" Johnson asked, assured me that everything was under control, that they were just close friends and co-workers. "But," Amina sighed, "on the arts, boundaries are often blurred. Creative people are emotional, passionate. Sometimes a spark grows into a flame." Johnson made a note in his notebook. "Did Zara ever talk about marital problems?" "Not directly. But I noticed she mentioned her husband less and less, avoided talking about home life. One day I noticed a bruise on her wrist. She said she'd hit a door, but I wasn't sure." Brooks and Johnson looked at each other. "Do you think Elijah Turner might have been violent toward his wife?" Johnson clarified. Amina shrugged her shoulders. "I'd only seen him a couple of times at exhibition openings. He seemed reserved, even cold. Not the type to make a scene in public. But what was going on at home, who knows?" After talking to the director, Detectives interviewed several other gallery employees. They all confirmed a special closeness between Zara and Jamal, though none spoke directly about a romantic relationship. They were like one and the same. A young assistant told Kyle, finishing each other's sentences, constantly exchanging glances. Sometimes I'd catch them in the vault, and they'd shut up when I walked in. But Zara never made a big deal of it. She always spoke of her husband with respect. Leaving the gallery, Johnson and Brooks headed to the art college where Jamal was a student. The dean of the art department, Professor Rogers, met them in his office littered with books and student sketches. Jamal Reed was one of our most talented students, the professor said, wiping his glasses. His technique was still raw, but he possessed a vision rarely seen in students his age. What kind of person was he? Johnson asked. Ambitious, determined, sometimes overconfident. But that's not always a flaw in art. The professor smiled. He knew exactly what he wanted: recognition, success, a place in the art world. How did he meet Zara Turner? Brooks asked. We cooperate with the Prism Gallery, organizing exhibitions of student work there. Jamal participated in one of them 8 months ago. His installation caught Zara's eye. She offered him a part-time job and mentorship. Did he mention a personal relationship with her? The professor hesitated. He was secretive about it, but I noticed the way his face changed when he talked about her: pride, hope, admiration. Perhaps something more. In the last few months, his work had become bolder, more emotional. He used to say he had found his muse. After talking to the professor, the detectives visited the dorm where Jamal lived. His roommate, Kevin, was shocked by the news of his friend's death. I can't believe Jay's dead, he repeated, sitting on the edge of his bed. We were still discussing his new project yesterday. Did Jamal ever talk about Zara Turner? Johnson asked. Kevin's eyes widened. Zara, of course he did. All the time. She was his goddess. That's what he called her. Said she changed his life, his art. Did he mention that they were romantically involved? Brooks clarified. Kevin fidgeted on the bed. He didn't say it explicitly, but sometimes he'd come back in the morning with a stupid smile on his face. Once I saw a hickey on his neck. He said something like, the creative process can sometimes be passionate. I thought he had a girlfriend, but he never named names. What about her husband? Did Jamal ever mention him? Johnson asked. Kevin frowned, trying to remember. He said something strange once. We were talking about some joint project with Zara, and I asked if her husband would mind that they were spending so much time together. Jamal replied, It won't be a problem soon. I didn't give it much thought at the time. Johnson made a note in his notebook. When was that? About 2 weeks ago, Kevin answered. Jamal had been very enthusiastic lately. He said his life was about to change dramatically. I thought he was referring to the exhibition he was preparing. After talking to Jamal's roommate, detectives went through his room. Among the art supplies, sketches, and art books, they found several photos of Zara, professional portraits and more personal shots of her smiling at the camera. In one of them, she was wearing a long shirt, presumably a man's shirt, with a glass of wine in her hand. Apparently, the photo was taken in an intimate setting. Back at the station, Johnson and Brooks organized the information they had gathered. So what do we got? Johnson spread the photos and notes out on the table. Zara and Jamal were definitely having an affair, an ambitious young artist and his mentor, a classic plot, and a husband who probably knew about it. Brooks added, the insurance policy, the cash withdrawn. It looks like Elijah was preparing for something. But if he planned the murder in advance, why choose such an obvious method? Johnson objected. Catch them together, massacre them, and then feign passion. Too risky. Brooks tapped her pen thoughtfully on the table. Maybe he wanted to avoid suspicion of premeditated murder. A crime of passion is usually punished less harshly. Johnson nodded. That theory made sense. If Elijah knew about the affair beforehand and decided to get rid of his wife for insurance, staging a murder of passion was the logical choice. Check every surveillance camera in the Turner House neighborhood for the last 2 weeks, he ordered. If Elijah was following his wife, maybe we'll find evidence. Brooks walked over to the board where photos of everyone involved in the drama were pinned. Elijah with his cold, reserved gaze. Zara beautiful and bright, the young ambitious Jamal. "You know what's bugging me," she said, pointing to Elijah's picture. "Why shoot 42 times? Even in a state of affect, it seems excessive. Like he wanted to make sure they were really dead." Johnson nodded, or wanted us to think he'd completely lost control. He picked up a folder of financial documents. "I want to question Elijah again tomorrow. See how he explains the insurance and the cash withdrawals." Johnson looked thoughtfully at the pictures of the victims. A beautiful woman and a young talented artist. Lovers caught off guard by a jealous husband. A classic story. But something about it didn't add up. "Why 42 shots?" he muttered. "What was so special about that number?" Brooks shrugged. "Maybe nothing. It was just how many rounds of ammunition he had at his disposal." But Johnson wasn't sure. In his experience, even the most obvious crimes sometimes hid unexpected mysteries. And this case seemed less and less obvious by the hour. The morning of the third day of the investigation began for Detective Marcus Johnson with a cup of strong coffee and a call from the tech department. Gwen Sullivan, the department's chief computer expert, rarely called without a serious reason. "I've got something interesting from Elijah Turner's computer," she said without preamble. "You'll want to see it." 20 minutes later, Johnson was already sitting in the lab, staring at the screen where Gwen was opening folder after folder. "I didn't find anything unusual at first," she explained, typing rapidly on the keyboard. "Just work documents, invoices, the usual stuff. But then I noticed this program." She pointed to an icon in the corner of the screen, a phone location tracking app. "Usually parents use those to keep tabs on their kids," Gwen said. But the Turners were childless. He was tracking his wife's phone. Johnson guessed. Exactly. And here's the data for the last 2 months. A map appeared on the screen with marked dots and lines: Zara Turner's travel routes. "Pay attention to these dots." Gwen pointed to repeated marks in one area of the city. "The address belongs to a small motel called the Moonlight Motel on the outskirts of Cleveland. Zara had been there 8 times in the last 6 weeks. Johnson frowned. "And this is even more interesting," Gwen continued, opening another window. "I checked Elijah's search log. In the last month, he searched for the following: spouse murder, life insurance, murder by passion conviction, how to define crime of passion, how to fake passion, jurisprudence on crimes of jealousy." Johnson stared at the list in amazement. "Could you tell me when he started these searches?" Gwen scrolled through the screen. "The first inquiries came in about 5 weeks ago, right after Zara started visiting the motel regularly. So he found out about the affair and started planning. One more thing," Gwen added. "I found deleted photos on his phone. He took them about 3 weeks ago." She opened a series of snapshots. One showed Zara and Jamal entering the motel, holding hands. The others were of them walking out a few hours later. "Classic pictures for a private investigator," Johnson said, but he chose to be judge and executioner. Upon returning to his office, Johnson found Tisha Brooks studying the printouts. "You won't believe what I found," she said, looking up. Elijah Turner wasn't supposed to be at work the day of the murder. Johnson was surprised, but he claimed he left early because he canceled a meeting with a client. "I checked his work calendar and talked to his secretary," Brooks explained. Hay had no appointment scheduled that day at all. He had taken the week off. But for some reason, he still went to the office in the morning. Johnson rubbed his chin thoughtfully, creating an alibi. He wanted his co-workers to see him in the morning so he could say he'd left because the meeting was canceled. "And there's something else," Brooks continued. "I checked the security cameras around their house. The day before the murder, Elijah came home around lunchtime, stayed for about an hour, and then left again. Zara wasn't home." Johnson asked. "Rehearsing," Brooks suggested. "Checking how long it would take to get from the office to home. Getting the place ready, maybe?" Brooks nodded. "One last thing. I got the phone records. 3 days before the murder, Elijah called the Moonlight Motel, and on the day of the murder, an hour before it happened, he texted Jamal Reed from Zara's cell phone. She showed him the printout. "Come over now." Elijah left for a meeting. "Want you?" Johnson whistled. He trapped Jamal from his wife's cell phone. "That's not all," Brooks added. I checked the insurance policy. There's a double payout clause for violent death. Not $500, but $1 million. Johnson put all the details together. The picture was clear and grim. Elijah Turner found out about his wife's infidelity, followed her, gathered evidence, and carefully planned a double murder disguised as a crime of passion. I need a warrant to search his office at home, Johnson said, rising. Something tells me that's where we'll find the last of the missing details. The Turner house was still sealed as a crime scene. Johnson and Brooks entered Elijah's office on the first floor, a neat space with a solid wooden desk, bookshelves, and a safe in the corner. He said the code to the safe was Zara's birthday. Johnson recalled. Brooks checked in the records. March 15th, so 1503, the safe opened. Inside were documents, some cash, and an empty gun holster. This is where the murder weapon was kept, Brooks stated. Johnson began methodically going through the desk drawers. In the bottom drawer, he found a small leather-bound notebook. A diary of sorts, he said, flipping through the pages. The entries began about 6 weeks ago. Saw her phone's geolocation report today. Moonlight Motel. Second time in a week. Coincides with her late meetings. Got to check it out. Next entry, 3 days later, followed her. She met up with him, this young upstart from the gallery. They went into the motel together. They left 3 hours later. I need proof. Another week later, took pictures. Now I have proof. First impulse is confrontation, divorce. But then what? She gets half of everything I've earned. And me nothing. The notes grew increasingly grim. Found out about insurance policies. Interesting option. Double payout on violent deaths. Just a thought. Just thoughts for now. Crime of passion is a much shorter sentence. Sometimes only a few years I can wait. The last entry was made the day before the murder. I'll set. I'll take tomorrow off but show up at the office. I'll send a text from her phone when she's in the shower. He'll come running like a faithful dog. 42, Johnson muttered. Why exactly 42? Brooks shrugged. A random number, maybe? In such a meticulous plan. I doubt it. Johnson looked around the bookshelves, trying to find some clue. His gaze fell on a volume of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything, he said quietly. What? Brooks didn't understand. In this book, a supercomputer has calculated that the answer to the ultimate question of life is the number 42. It's a cult science fiction joke. Johnson took the book off the shelf. On the cover was an inscription, "A gift from Zara to my ultimate question of life. Love, Z." He even left a message in this one. Johnson shook his head. 42 shots were the answer to Zara's betrayal. In the car on the way back to the station, Johnson was piecing together the details. Here's how it went down, Johnson said. Elijah suspected cheating, started tracking Zara's cell phone, found out she was a regular at the motel with Jamal, took pictures, collected evidence. But instead of confrontation or divorce, he decided to go the other way. He took out a double payout life insurance policy on her. Brooks continued. Heard began planning a murder that would look like a crime of passion. Sent a text message to Jamal from her phone, luring him into a trap. Johnson stopped at a stoplight. When Jamal arrived, he and Zara secluded themselves in the bedroom, and Elijah was waiting for the right moment. Brooks said, had already taken the gun out of the safe, prepared the extra magazines. He went upstairs, opened the door, and methodically shot them both. He didn't just shoot them, Johnson said. He fired exactly 42 times, a number that had special meaning for him and Zara, a final message to his dead wife, and afterward. Brooks finished. He feigned shock and effect. A cold, calculated plan. Back at the station, Johnson reported his findings to Lieutenant Morris. He listened carefully and nodded. Enough to charge him with premeditated murder. Good work, Johnson. I want to talk to him again myself, the detective said. Show him we've uncovered his plan. That's not necessary to the case, the lieutenant pointed out. Not for the case. It is for me. The holding cell was cramped and impersonal. Elijah Turner sat at his desk, looking more collected than the day of his arrest. When he saw Johnson, he nodded slightly as if expecting his visit. Detective Johnson, he said calmly. Any news on my case? Johnson sat across from him, placing the evidence folder on the table but not opening it. We found your diary, Mr. Turner, and the tracking software you installed on your wife's phone." Elijah's face remained impenetrable, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Johnson countered. "You knew about the affair. You followed her, took pictures. You took out a double death benefit on her." He laid printouts of search terms on the table. How to fake passion, spousal homicide, life insurance. Pretty unambiguous queries, don't you think? Elijah remained silent, his hands trembling faintly. "And then you lured Jamal into a trap," Johnson continued. "You sent a text message from Zara's cell phone, pretending to be her. Poor guy rushed over thinking he had a date waiting for him." He paused. 42 shots, Mr. Turner. The answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. Nice touch." Elijah's face trembled. "She gave me that book for our first anniversary," he said quietly. "Said I was her answer to everything. And then she found another answer," Johnson said. "And you couldn't accept it. You don't understand." Elijah leaned forward. 7 years. 7 years I gave her everything I had, and she's with this boy who could be her little brother. So why not just get a divorce?" Elijah grinned bitterly. "What would I have gotten? She'd take half of everything I'd earned. Our house, our cars, our savings, and I'd be left with nothing but alimony and humiliation." His voice got colder. "This way I get insurance. Fair trade, don't you think? For 2 ruined lives." Johnson shook his head. "I don't think a jury would agree. It was a crime of passion," Elijah said with pressure. "I caught them together and lost control. My lawyer is already working on that line of defense." Johnson pulled the last entry from the diary out of the folder. "It's all set. I'll take tomorrow off but show up at the office. I'll send a text from her phone when she's in the shower. He'll come running like a faithful dog." And then 42. He raised his eyes to Elijah. "This is not a spontaneous crime of passion, Mr. Turner. This is a cold-blooded, planned double murder." Elijah leaned back in his chair, his face contorted with anger. "She deserved it. They both deserved it. Do you know how many times she lied to me, working late? Urgent project. Helping Jamal with his degree. And he could barely contain his rage. I've seen pictures of them. I've seen them laughing, kissing in a cheap motel like some. But you didn't go to her with those pictures," Johnson interrupted. "You didn't make a scene. You didn't file for divorce. You decided it was better to kill them both and get the money. I'd only get a few years." Elijah muttered, more to himself than to Johnson. Felony crime of passion. Temporary loss of judgment due to severe emotional distress. 5 to 7 years, maybe less with good behavior. I'd get out and I'd have $1 million. And now you're going to get life. Probably without parole, Johnson said, standing up. "Juries don't like calculating murderers, Mr. Turner." Elijah looked up, his eyes wide with the realization that all his plans had collapsed. "The lawyer can still prove passion," he said without much conviction. "With the diary, the search warrants, and the fake message." Johnson shook his head. "I don't think so." He gathered the documents into a folder and headed for the door. Turning around one last time, he saw Elijah sitting with his shoulders slumped, staring into the void. A man whose perfect plan had fallen apart. 3 weeks later, Johnson and Brooks stood outside the courthouse after the preliminary hearing. Elijah Turner was charged with double premeditated murder. His lawyer tried to insist on effect, but the judge ruled the evidence gathered was sufficient for a full trial. "Do you think he'll get life in prison?" Brooks asked as they walked down the wide steps. "Most likely." Johnson nodded. The planning, the luring of the victims, the 42 shots. The jury would show no leniency. They reached the car, and Johnson looked back at the courthouse one last time. "You know what still amazes me," he said, "the cold calculation. He was willing to spend a few years in prison just to get the money and get revenge. Most murders are committed for money or passion," Brooks said. "In this case, it was both. And 2 are dead, and the 3rd will spend the rest of his life in prison." Johnson shook his head, all because he couldn't accept the end of the relationship. They got into the car and Brooks started the engine. "Where to now?" she asked. "To the station. We still have 4 open cases," Johnson replied, opening a file folder. The car started. leaving behind the courthouse where the fate of Elijah Turner was being decided. A man who thought he'd found the perfect solution, but had miscalculated the most important thing. No plan is perfect if it's based on murder, and no insurance is worth 42 shots. The tragic story of Elijah Turner teaches us one of the oldest and hardest lessons in human nature: unchecked emotions, when combined with betrayal and resentment, can lead to irreversible consequences. Elijah's initial discovery of his wife's affair was a moment that could have been handled through reason, painful though it might have been. Instead, he allowed his anger to fester, feeding on fantasies of revenge until those fantasies became a detailed, deliberate plan. His failure to address the hurt openly, through conversation, therapy, or even separation, shows us how crucial it is to face emotional pain before it corrodes into something darker. Another stark lesson here is the danger of letting pride and financial fear outweigh the value of life. Elijah wasn't just hurt emotionally, he was terrified of losing material wealth, public image, and control. But in trying to protect himself through violence and manipulation, he destroyed everything he had, including his future. It reminds us that no financial loss, no matter how devastating it seems in the moment, is worth throwing away our freedom, our humanity, and the lives of others. Money, pride, status. None of these things can justify taking a life. This case also underlines how appearances can be dangerously misleading. From the outside, the Turners seemed like the perfect couple, successful, polite, engaged in their community. But behind closed doors, cracks had been widening for months. It's a reminder not to idealize the lives we see from afar and to recognize that everyone, no matter how perfect they appear, struggles with hidden battles. For our own relationships, it teaches us the importance of communication, honesty, and seeking help when a bond begins to break, rather than covering up problems until they explode. Finally, Elijah's calculated decision to fire 42 shots, a number symbolic of a once happy marriage, shows the devastating power of symbolism turned toxic. Love that once gave meaning to small things can, if twisted by betrayal and resentment, become a weapon of destruction. We should never underestimate how deeply emotional symbols, anniversaries, and private jokes can anchor or haunt a person. If we experience betrayal, we must be vigilant in seeking healing, counseling, or even spiritual help, rather than allowing old symbols to become reasons for violence. In the end, Elijah not only destroyed 2 young lives, but also condemned himself to a future without freedom, love, or hope, all because he couldn't bear the collapse of a relationship that had already been dying. The final advice is simple, but profound. When we are wronged, we must choose healing over revenge. No amount of rage can fix betrayal, and no amount of planning can undo the consequences of a single irreversible choice. In the end, Elijah Turner thought he could control the chaos in his heart by controlling the lives of others. But murder never brings peace, only silence. And sometimes the greatest prison isn't made of steel bars. It's built from the choices we can never undo. He planned it all. Every step, every shot. But in the end, Elijah forgot one thing: no amount of planning can bring back what's already gone. Love once lost is never reclaimed through violence, only mourned in silence. He thought he had written the perfect ending to his pain, but in reality, he only authored his own life sentence, trapped forever by the echoes of 42 shots.